You imagine the top of the world is silent. You imagine that when you rise high enough above the sulfur clouds and the weeping smog of the manufactorums, there is only the wind and the light of the stars. You are wrong. The top of the world is not silent. It hums. It is a low, constant vibration of power, generators of atmospheric scrubbers, forcing clean air into lungs that have never known the taste of ash. That was my world. The ivory spire. A needle of white plasteel piercing the throat of the sky, keeping us separate from the billions of wretches breathing poison below. I remember the light on Ascension Day. It was artificial, filtered through stained glass, the size of a titan's shield, casting patterns of gold and crimson across the banquet floor. We were celebrating the Emperor, or so we said. In truth, we were celebrating ourselves. We were celebrating the fact that we were up here, and they were down there. I held a glass of Amasek, a vintage older than the bones of my grandfather. It was cool against my fingertips, the crystal etched with the heraldry of House Krentz, a hawk clutching a lightning bolt. I remember studying the condensation gathering on the rim, a tiny, perfect ecosystem of moisture, in a room climate-controlled to the exact degree of comfort. The liquid inside was the color of amber and blood. When I drank, it tasted of spices from worlds I would never visit, grown under suns that did not burn with the sickly yellow hue of our own. It tasted of authority. That is what power tastes like, you see. It isn't sharp or bitter. It is smooth. It masks the rot. I looked out over the hall at the sea of faces, generals in dress uniforms, heavy with unearned medals, noblewomen draped in furs, harvested from extinct beasts, priests whose robes dragged on the polished marble. They were smiling. They were afraid of me, and they were smiling. That was the order of things. The music was a soft, synthesized quartet, playing a variation of a Terran hymn, stripped of its reverence, and repurposed for background noise. It was designed to be ignored. We were masters of ignoring things. We ignored the reports of famine in the lower hives. We ignored the riots in the mining sectors. We ignored the tithe ships that sometimes left our orbit lighter than they should have been. I stood on the dais, my back to the great observation window. Behind me, the thick clouds of the atmosphere churned a sea of toxic gray that concealed the suffering of the population. I didn't need to look at them. I was the governor. I was the planetary will. If I did not see them, they did not exist in any way that mattered. My heart beat slow and steady, the pulse of a man who believes himself untouchable. I was a god in a silk coat. Then came the interruption. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a scream. It was a sound far more offensive to my sensibilities, the crackle of a voxcaster. A servant, a menial with a back bent from years of bowing, shuffled through the crowd. He carried a silver platter, not with food, but with a portable Vox unit. The device was old, its brass casing tarnished, a relic of function in a room of form. It hissed. That white noise cut through the polite laughter and the clinking of silverware like a knife through velvet. I watched the guests part ways for the servant, their noses wrinkling. Not just at the interruption, but at the servant himself. He smelled of ozone and cheap nutrient paste. He was a reminder of the machinery that kept us afloat. I hated him for it. I hated him for bringing the reality of the station into my sanctuary. The servant knelt at the foot of the dais, lifting the tray high. His hand shook. He knew the penalty for disrupting a toast. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of my displeasure press down on his neck until I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. I took another sip of Amasek, savoring the burn, letting the room watch me ignore the urgency. Finally, I descended one step. Just one. "Speak," I said. My voice was calm, practiced. It was the voice I used to sentence men to the penal legions. The servant didn't look up. "My lord," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Orbital defense. Priority Alpha. They insisted." I frowned. Priority Alpha was reserved for invasion or planetary collapse. The sky outside was empty. The sensors were clear. Who insisted? I asked, swirls of irritation beginning to mar my perfect calm. The Vox unit on the tray crackled again, and a voice spoke. It wasn't the voice of my defense commander. It was a voice devoid of inflection, a voice that sounded like it had been transmitted through light years of cold void. "Unidentified vessel," the static whispered. "Entering high anchor. No transponder code. No engine signature." The room went quiet. The music stopped, though I hadn't ordered it to. The guests, those vultures in fine silk, sensed the shift in the air. They smelled blood in the water, even if they didn't know whose it was yet. "A ship," I scoffed, swirling the wine in my glass. "A smuggler, a rogue trader lost in the warp storms." I looked at my guests, inviting them to share in my amusement. "Tell the batteries to fire a warning shot across their bow. If they don't transmit codes within a minute, turn them into debris." It was a standard order, a routine display of strength. But the voice on the Vox did not acknowledge the command. Instead, a new sound emerged from the speaker. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a heartbeat, slowed to the point of death. "They are not responding to hails, Lord Governor." The defense officer's voice returned, trembling now. Visual confirmation. "The hull is black. It absorbs the scanner waves. It is a black ship." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The black ships, the harvesters, the vessels of the Inquisition, and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. They were the bogeymen we used to frighten children in the nursery, the silent monsters that came to take away the witches and the mutants. But they did not come for governors. They did not come for the faithful. I was faithful. I paid my tithes. I maintained the shrines. I felt a flicker of something in my chest, not fear, surely not fear, but a cold indignity. They had entered my orbit without permission. They had disrupted my ascension day. This was a breach of protocol. This was an insult. "Turn that thing off," I snapped, gesturing at the Voxcaster with my free hand. The servant flinched. "My lord, they are hailing the spire directly. They are requesting. I do not care what they are requesting." My voice rose, cracking the veneer of my composure. I could feel the eyes of the nobility on me. If I showed weakness now, if I showed deference to a silent ship in the void, I would lose them. I am the Emperor's instrument on this world. Protocol dictates they announce themselves to me. They wait for my clearance. I stepped down from the dais and kicked the silver tray. The Voxcaster clattered across the marble floor, the voice inside it dissolving into a squeal of feedback before cutting out. The silence that followed was absolute. The servant scrambled to retrieve the device, bowing so low his forehead touched the floor. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I forced a smile onto my face, though it felt stiff like dried clay. "A mistake by the orbital monitors," I announced to the room. "The sensors are old. They see ghosts in the radiation belts. It is nothing." I raised my glass high. To the Emperor. The response was weak, a murmured chorus of the Emperor that lacked the fervor it had held moments ago. They drank, but their eyes were darting to the windows, searching the gray clouds for a shadow that shouldn't be there. I turned my back on them. I walked to the great window and looked out. The glass was thick armored against the acidic rain, but I felt naked. I stared into the murk. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, a ship as black as a void shark was hanging above my home. It was silent. It was waiting. And for the first time in years, the amasec tasted sour on my tongue. I told myself it was the cork. I told myself it was the humidity. But deep down in the lizard brain that remembers when we were prey, I knew. The hum of the generators didn't sound like power anymore. It sounded like a cage rattling. I finished the glass in one swallow. It didn't help. The cold spot in my chest was growing. I signaled the musicians to play louder. I wanted to drown out the silence of the void. I wanted to drown out the thought that had just bloomed in the back of my mind. A poisonous flower. They know. I didn't know what they knew. I didn't know what crimes I had committed that would warrant a black ship. But in the Imperium, innocence proves nothing. There is no innocence, only degrees of guilt. And as the music swelled, desperate and shrill, I realized I was just waiting for the first stone to fall. The party continued a pantomime of joy, while the sky above us turned into a judgment. The hangover did not feel like a sickness of the body. It felt like a premonition. I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth, the phantom bitterness of the amasec that had turned sour the night before. Usually, my mornings were a symphony of organized servitude. The shutters would part at precisely 0700. A servitor would offer a heated towel. Hareth, my seneschal, would be standing by the door with a slate of data reciting the planetary output figures before my feet even touched the rugs. But today the shutters remained closed. The room was dim, lit only by the standby lights of the cogitator banks. And there was no Hareth. There was no towel. There was only the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in the stillness. I sat up, the silk sheets sliding off me like dead skin. Light, I commanded. The voice activation clicked, and the lumen strips flickered on harsh and white. I waited for the door to open. I waited for the apology, the groveling excuse for this lapse in protocol. I had already formulated the punishment in my mind, a docking of pay, perhaps a few lashes for the shift supervisor. But the door stayed shut. I stood up, my bare feet sinking into the thick carpet. It was cold. The heating elements in the floor were offline, a small detail, a minor malfunction, but it sent a shiver up my spine that had nothing to do with temperature. I dressed myself. It was a clumsy affair. I fumbled with the buttons of my tunic, realizing with a spike of shame how long it had been since I had performed such a simple task. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a sudden, biting isolation. I walked out into the corridor. The grand hallway of the Krentz dynasty stretched for 300 meters, lined with the busts of my ancestors. Usually, this hall echoed with the boots of the house guard, the rustle of scribes, the hum of cleaning drones. Today, it was a tomb. The silence was physical. It pressed against my eardrums a heavy, suffocating weight. I walked past the marble face of my father. He looked disappointed. He always did. But today his stone eyes seemed to accuse me. "Where is your court, Valerius?" they asked. "Where is your power? I walked faster." The sound of my own footsteps slapped against the stone. Clack, 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 like a gavel striking a sounding block over and over again. I reached Hareth's office. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, half expecting to find him asleep at his desk, overwhelmed by the tithe reports. The room was empty. A cup of wreck calf sat on the desk, a layer of mold growing on its surface. It had been sitting there for days. Days, no, that was impossible. I saw him yesterday. Or did I? Time felt slippery, distorted. I moved to his Voxcaster. I needed to call the captain of the guard. I needed to scream at someone to assert my reality upon the world. I toggled the switch. Bridge, I barked. Security control. Anyone. Static. Just the white noise of the universe mocking me. The channel wasn't jammed. It was open. There was just no one on the other end. I found a guard at the intersection of the East Wing. He was a young man, a boy really wearing the blue and gold livery of my house. He stood beneath a flickering lumen, his laser gun held across his chest. He wasn't standing at attention. He was leaning against the wall, staring at the floor. When he heard me approach, he jumped, nearly dropping his weapon. "My lord," he gasped, snapping into a caricature of a salute. His eyes were wide-rimmed with red. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Where is Captain Varys?" I demanded. My voice sounded thin in the empty hallway. I tried to inject it with the thunder of command, but it came out as a brittle snap. "Where are the patrols?" "The hallway is deserted." The boy swallowed hard. I could smell his fear. It smelled of sour sweat and cheap tobacco. Captain Varys. He was called away, my lord, by the high tower. I narrowed my eyes. The astropathic choir. Why would they call the captain of the guard? The boy didn't answer. He just gripped his gun tighter, his knuckles white. And the others, I pressed, stepping closer. The servants, the advisors. Where have they gone? "They left, my lord," he whispered. "When the ship arrived. The black ship. They said the ink was dry." I stared at him. The ink was dry. It was a phrase from the lower hives of superstition. It meant a death warrant had been signed. It meant fate was sealed. "Cowards," I hissed. "They flee from a shadow. From a ship that hasn't even hailed us." I grabbed the boy by his collar. "You are still here." Why, he looked at me, then really looked at me. There was no loyalty in his eyes, only a terrifying resignation. "Because the doors are locked, my lord. The blast shutters came down an hour ago. No one can leave. We are sealed in." I let him go. He slumped back against the wall. Sealed in. My palace, my fortress had become a container. I turned away from him, unable to bear the pity in his gaze. I walked back towards my private chambers. The paranoia began to set in, then creeping into my mind like frost. Was the guard lying? Was this a coup? Had my cousins finally made their move? But deep down, I knew it wasn't politics. Politics was loud. Politics was messy. This was surgery. I was being isolated, cut off from the host, prepared for excision. The ventilation system roared overhead. The great fans that circulated air through the spire usually hummed in the background unnoticed. Now they sounded like the breathing of a colossal beast. Huh. Huh. Inhaling the stale air of my fear, exhaling the dust of my crumbling legacy. I reached my chambers and locked the door. I engaged the mag locks. 3 inches of plasteel slammed into place. I was safe. I was alone. I went to the wet bar and poured a glass of water. My hand hovered over the glass. Had they poisoned the water supply? If the servants had fled who monitored the filtration, I poured the water into a plant pot. The fern wilted instantly. No, that was my imagination. But I didn't drink. I sat in the center of the room, on a chair upholstered in Grok's hide worth more than a worker's lifetime earnings. I held my last pistol in my lap. It was a ceremonial piece, inlaid with gold filigree, never fired in anger. It felt heavy and cold. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A knock, an explosion. A voice on the Vox. I watched the shadows lengthen across the floor as the artificial day cycle turned to night. The shadows seemed to stretch towards me like fingers. The silence in the palace wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid. It was full of the realization that I was not the master of this world. I was just the tenant, and the landlord had come to collect. The silence stayed, and for the first time I prayed. Not for salvation, but for noise. Anything to break the quiet. I decided I would not be found, cowering in my bedroom like a frightened child. If the end was coming, it would find me on the throne of St. Drusus. It was a massive thing, carved from obsidian volcanic glass, situated at the far end of the audience chamber. I walked there, the echo of my boots, the only sound in a room designed to hold 1,000 petitioners. I climbed the steps. I sat down. The stone was hard and unforgiving, leaching the warmth from my body through the fabric of my trousers. I gripped the armrests until my knuckles turned white. I adjusted my sash. I waited. I told myself that I was the Lord Governor. I told myself that on this world, my word was the law of physics. If I ordered the sun to stop, the people would squeeze their eyes shut and pretend it had. That authority had to mean something. It had to be a shield. The doors to the chamber were 20 feet high, made of blast-proof, adamant reinforcement, plated in gold. They didn't open. They were unsealed. It started with a heavy metallic thud, the sound of magnetic locks being forcibly disengaged from the outside. Then came the groan of hydraulics pushing against dead weight. The doors parted. They didn't swing wide. They were pushed just enough to allow entry, moving with a reluctant shudder. Fog rolled in from the corridor, not the weather, but the sacred incense of the Adeptus. It smelled of heavy spices, old parchment, and the distinct copper tang of promethium. It was the scent of a cathedral that had been dipped in blood. He walked through the fog. He was not alone, but I did not see his retinue. I only saw him. He was a mountain of ceramite and velvet. His power armor was not the bright heraldry of the space marines I had seen in Pictcasts. It was a dull matte black, draped in crimson robes that dragged across the floor. A golden rosette hung around his neck, the symbol of the Inquisition, catching the dim light like a burning eye. He did not walk, he told. Each step was a heavy rhythmic impact that sent tremors through the floorboards and up into the base of my throne. Thud, thud, thud. He stopped 10 paces from the dais. He didn't bow, he didn't salute. He simply existed, an immovable object in the center of my world. "Identify yourself," I shouted. My voice was loud, projected from the diaphragm as my tutors had taught me, but in the vast emptiness of the hall, it sounded tinny. "You enter the presence of Governor Valerius Krentz, steward of this system, chosen of the Senatorum Imperialis." I stood up, trying to use height to my advantage. "I demand to see your warrant. I demand to know why my skies are violated and my servants have fled." The silence that followed was insulting. The figure raised a hand, a gauntlet the size of a human head, encrusted with purity seals. He reached up and removed his helmet. I expected a monster. I expected a scarred fanatic with eyes burning with madness. Instead, the face revealed was terrifyingly mundane. He was pale, hairless, with a face that looked like it had been eroded by centuries of rain. His eyes were gray, flat, and utterly bored. He looked at me not with hatred, but with the same indifferent calculation a butcher uses when assessing a carcass. "Sit down, citizen," he said. His voice was soft, amplified by the grill of his armor, so that it seemed to originate from the air itself. It wasn't a command, it was a statement of fact. My knees buckled. I didn't mean to sit, but my legs simply gave up the ghost of resistance. I sank back onto the cold obsidian. "You have no jurisdiction here without a writ from the High Lords," I whispered, the fight draining out of me like water from a cracked jar. I am the law. The law." The Inquisitor tilted his head slightly. "You are a rounding error, Valerius. You are a discrepancy in a ledger." He reached into his robes and pulled out a scroll case made of bone. With a flick of his wrist, he unfurled the parchment. It was long, trailing down to touch the floor. The sound of the dry paper unrolling was louder than a gunshot in the silence. Crackle. Hiss. By the authority of the Holy Ordo Hereticus, he read his eyes, not even looking at the text, as if he had memorized this speech 1,000 times for 1,000 other men. "You are hereby stripped of title, rank, and name. Your gene code is stricken from the records. Your assets are seized for the war effort." He looked up at me then. "You spoke of Terra. Terra has forgotten your name, Valerius. To them, you are already dead. We are just here to collect the remains." He didn't mention a specific crime. He didn't mention the missing tithes or the illicit trade agreements, or the times I had looked the other way when the cults met in the Underhive. He didn't have to. The specifics didn't matter. Guilt was not a question of what I had done. Guilt was a condition of my existence. I opened my mouth to beg to offer him money, planet souls, anything. But the Inquisitor turned his back on me. He gestured to the shadows behind him. "Take it," he said. Not, "Take him." Take it. The fog swirled, and I saw the red lenses of the stormtroopers glowing in the dark. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air had turned to solid ice in my lungs. It wasn't mercy. It was just the end of the first act. They did not take me to the black ship immediately. That would have been too dignified. Instead, they dragged me down the service elevators past the kitchens, where the feast for the Ascension was still being prepared. The air smelled of roasting swan and spiced glaze, a sickeningly rich aroma that clashed with the ozone stench of the stormtroopers. They threw me into one of the holding rooms used for unruly petitioners. I knew this room. I had signed the order for its construction 10 years ago. I remembered approving the budget for the soundproofing. I never thought I would be the one testing its efficacy. The floor was not marble here. It was great steel designed to be hosed down. It was cold. That is the first thing you realize when power leaves you. The world is incredibly biting cold. 2 of them held me. A third stepped forward. He did not speak. He simply reached out and took hold of my ceremonial sash, the purple silk weave that denoted my status as a peer of the Imperium. He didn't unfasten it. He pulled. The fabric tore with a sound like a shriek. I stumbled forward, gasping, but the hands on my arms held me firm, like vices of iron. Careful, I snapped the instinct of command, overriding the reality of my situation. That silk is imported from the weaving worlds of Ultima. It is worth more than your life. The trooper ignored me. He moved to my jacket next. Buttons made of pearl popped and scattered across the metal floor, clicking like hail. He stripped me with the efficiency of a machine, shucking corn. There was no malice in it, which made it worse. If they hated me, I would be a person. To them, I was just an obstacle to be cleared. Then he reached for my hand. The ring of House Krentz. It was a heavy gold band, set with a ruby that was said to contain a drop of the Emperor's own blood. A lie, of course, but a useful one. It had been on the finger of every governor for 600 years. It was tight. My knuckles were swollen from the wine and the stress. The trooper pulled. Pain shot up my arm. "Stop," I said, my voice trembling. "It won't come off. You need oil. You need..." He didn't stop. He didn't ask for oil. He simply applied more pressure, bracing his boot against my shin. There was a wet pop, a sensation of skin tearing, and then the ring was gone. I stared at my hand. It looked alien. It was pale, shaking, and bleeding. He tossed the ring into a metal bin marked Evidence. It landed with a dull clunk, buried under my torn sash. My heritage, my history, just trash in a bucket. The door opened again. They brought in my chamberlain, an old man named Corvus, who had served my father. He was weeping. He saw me standing there, stripped to my undergarments, shivering in the cold air, and his eyes went wide. He fell to his knees. "My lord," he sobbed. Tell them, we are loyal." A stormtrooper stepped behind him. There was no ceremony, no reading of rites. The trooper raised a bolt pistol to the back of Corvus's head. "No," I whispered. I raised a hand. "Wait. He is essential to the archives. He knows the codes." The trooper pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small room. It wasn't a bang. It was a thunderclap that sucked the air out of the space. Corvus didn't fall. He simply ceased to exist as a person. The mass reactive shell detonated inside his skull. Wet, hot matter sprayed across the room. It splattered against my legs. It was warm. It was the only warmth in the room. I looked down at the red ruin on the steel grate. That was Corvus. He knew the birthday of every noble on the planet. He knew how I liked my tea. Now he was just a stain that would need to be hosed down. The trooper holstered his weapon. He looked at me, his red lenses unblinking. "Processing complete," he said. "They left me then." They didn't lock the door. There was no handle on the inside. I stood in the center of the room, half naked, covered in the blood of my servant. I looked at the bucket where my ring lay. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to put it back on to hide the nakedness of my hand. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. The reality of the universe had finally crashed through the walls of my delusion. I wasn't Valerius Krent's Lord Governor. I was just a bag of meat that could be opened with a pull of a trigger. I looked at the reflection in the steel wall. A pale, shivering man stared back. I didn't recognize him. The silence returned heavier than before. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting for me. Time died in the dark. I do not know how long the journey took. They blindfolded me, shackled my wrists and ankles, and threw me into the back of a transport skimmer. I felt the descent in my stomach, a lurching, sickening drop that went on for hours. We were going down. Past the spire, past the hab blocks, past the manufactorums, down to the roots of the world. The air grew heavy and thick, tasting of recycled sweat and ancient mold. When they finally stopped and dragged me out, the heat was suffocating. They stripped the blindfold, shoved me through a rust-pitted hatch, and slammed it shut. Total darkness. Not the darkness of a bedroom at night, but the absolute, crushing blackness of a grave. I reached out my hands, trembling, and touched wet stone. I was in a box. A stone box buried under miles of city. There was a sound. It was the only clock I had left. Plink. A drop of water hitting a puddle somewhere in the corner. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. Plink. It was a rhythmic torture. Every drop was a second of my life slipping away into the muck. I tried to stand, but the ceiling was too low. I had to hunch over my spine, grinding against itself. I, who had walked halls with ceilings painted to look like the heavens, was now forced to bow like a beggar just to exist. I crawled to the corner and curled up, wrapping my arms around my knees to preserve warmth. But there was no warmth. The dampness seeped into my bones, a cold rot that made me shiver violently. I wasn't Valerius anymore. I was just meat in the dark. I began to talk. At first it was a demand. "Guard, there has been a mistake. Check the logs." My voice bounced off the wet walls and died instantly. No echo. The moss absorbed it. Then the demands turned to bargaining. I spoke to the Emperor. I'd never been a pious man. Religion was for the masses, a tool to keep them working. But now I found myself haggling with the Golden Throne. I built the Cathedral of St. Avelin, I whispered into the black. I increased the tithe output by 4% last quarter. 4%. Surely that buys mercy. I am loyal. I am useful. I waited for a sign, a light, a voice. There was only the plink, plink of the water. It sounded like a finger tapping on a desk, waiting for a payment I couldn't make. Then came the voices. They drifted through the ventilation shafts, ghostly and distorted. At first I thought I was hallucinating. Then I realized they were other prisoners. "Mercy," a voice groaned miles away, or perhaps just next door. "Kill me." "Please," another voice was reciting a list of numbers over and over, a broken mind stuck in a loop. I pressed my ear to the grate. These were the heretics, the traitors, and I was among them. Was I one of them? My mind raced back through the years. Had I signed the wrong document? Had I insulted a cardinal? I remembered the trade deal with the rogue trader, the one who brought the exotic furs. Had his ship been tainted? It wasn't my fault I hissed to the rats that I could hear skittering in the shadows. I didn't know. I am a governor. I don't check the cargo manifests. I felt something brush against my foot. Fur. Wet, matted fur. I kicked out screaming, scrambling back until my head hit the stone wall. The rat squealed and scurried away. I sat there, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was a man who had commanded armies. I had ordered the destruction of cities from orbit. And now, I was terrified of a rodent in the dark. The humiliation was sharper than any knife. I pulled my knees tighter to my chest. I started to rock back and forth. "The Emperor protects," I mumbled. "The Emperor protects." But the words felt like ash in my mouth. He didn't protect. He ruled, and I was no longer part of his rule. I was the waste product. The water dripped. Plink. The silence stretched. I realized then that the silence was the true torture. It forced you to look inward. And when I looked inside myself past the titles, and the silks, and the amasek, I found nothing. Just a scared little boy who wanted his father to come and turn on the lights. But my father was dead, and the lights were never coming back on. I closed my eyes, though it made no difference in the pitch black. "I am innocent," I said. But it was a question, not a statement. The silence didn't answer. It just waited. It knew I would break long before the door opened. The door to the oubliette opened with a scream of rusted hinges, but the sound was lost in the sudden, blinding violence of the light. It wasn't the warm sun of the upper spire. It was a floodlight, harsh and chemical white, searing into retinas that had adjusted to absolute pitch black. I didn't have time to shield my eyes. Hands, strong, impersonal hands, dragged me out by my armpits. I tried to walk, but my legs were useless, atrophied from the cramped confinement. I was a sack of grain being hauled to the thresher. They dragged me down a corridor that smelled distinctively different from the dungeon. The smell of rot was gone, replaced by the stinging scent of aggressive antiseptic and the copper tang of old dried blood. It was the smell of a hospital run by a butcher. They strapped me to a table. It was titled, at a 45-degree angle, a slab of cold iron with runnels carved into the side's gutters for the fluids to drain away. I was naked, shivering, exposed under the glare of the surgery lumens. My interrogator was not the inquisitor from the throne room. This was a specialist. He was a small man, wearing a leather apron over his red robes. His hands were replaced with bionic tools, articulated fingers that ended in needles, scalpels, and cauterizing prods. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my body the way a mechanic looks at a malfunctioning engine. He was arranging his tray of instruments. There were neural whips, monofilament blades, and devices I couldn't name that hummed with a low, menacing frequency. "State your crimes," he said. His voice was bored. He wasn't asking because he wanted to know. He was calibrating the machine. I started to babble. "I am innocent. I am Valerius Krentz. I have done nothing but serve. Check the tithe records." The interrogator sighed. It was a sound of professional disappointment. "Incorrect," he muttered. He stepped forward. He didn't strike me. He simply extended a metal finger, the tip glowing cherry red, and pressed it against the soft skin of my inner thigh. The pain was not a sensation. It was a universe. It erased the room, the light, the table. There was only the white-hot point of contact and the screaming. I heard a scream, high, shrill, pathetic. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from my own throat. He held it there for 6 seconds. I know it was 6 seconds, because I counted them in my soul, each one an eternity. Then he pulled back. The smell of cooking my meat wafted up to my nose. I retched, dry heaving against the leather straps. "State your crimes," he repeated, his tone unchanged. I tried. I really tried to think. What did they want? I skimmed from the planetary defense budget. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. I bought artwork instead of void shields. I did it. I admit it." The interrogator paused. He picked up a long, thin needle connected to a coil of wire. "That is administrative error," he said. "That is not heresy. You are wasting my time." He inserted the needle under my fingernail. It slid in, slowly scraping against the bone. I didn't scream this time. I just made a gargling sound as the air left my lungs. He flipped a switch. Electricity arced through the wire. My hand spasmed so hard I thought the wrist would snap. My vision went white. The truth is, in the flesh, he intoned like a priest giving a sermon. Pain is the key that unlocks the tongue. Hours passed, or maybe days. I lost the concept of time. The table became my entire world. I confessed to everything. I confessed to crimes I had committed. I confessed to crimes I had only thought about. When the pain became too much, I started inventing crimes. I told him I worshipped the dark gods. I told him I had sold my sister to Xenos raiders. I told him I spat on the Aquila every morning. I would have told him I killed the Emperor himself if it meant he would put down the pliers. I broke. It wasn't a heroic resistance. There was no defiance. I shattered like cheap glass. I wept and begged him to stop promising him the locations of vaults that didn't exist. I named names. I gave him the names of my rivals, my friends, my loyal servants. Captain Varus, I shrieked as the neural whip lashed across my chest. He reads forbidden texts. He told me, take him, and leave me be. I sold their souls to buy myself 5 seconds of respite. I felt the shame of it, a deep corroding acid in my gut, but the fear of the pain was stronger. The interrogator didn't care about the names. He was writing it all down, his auto-quill scratching furiously on a long scroll of parchment. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. That sound was louder than my screams. Eventually he stopped. He wiped his instruments with a rag that was already stiff with gore. He looked at the scroll, now filled with the frantic ramblings of a broken man. Sufficient, he said. He pushed a button and the table leveled out. I lay there, twitching my body a map of agony. I was covered in burns, cuts, and bruises, but the deepest wound was invisible. I had given them everything. I had stripped myself of every scrap of honor. I was no longer a governor. I was a traitor, a heretic, a coward. I had spoken the words they wanted to hear. A servitor approached with a bucket of water and splashed it over me. The salt in the water stung my open wounds, but I was too exhausted to flinch. The interrogator leaned over me, his bionic eye whirring as it zoomed in on my face. "You have signed your death warrant with your own tongue, Valerius," he said. The funny thing is, we knew about the budget. We knew about the smuggling. We just wanted to see if you had the strength to die with dignity. He turned away, collecting his scroll. You did not. The lights dimmed. They left me strapped to the table, shivering in the mixture of water, blood, and urine. The smell of antiseptic returned cold and clinical. I closed my eyes. I wanted to die. I prayed for the bolt pistol. I prayed for the executioner's axe. Anything was better than this knowledge. I was hollow. They had scooped out the man I used to be and left only the fear. And in the silence of the torture chamber, I realized the worst truth of all. I would have said anything. I would have betrayed the entire human race to stop the hurting. That is what remains when the lies are stripped away. Just a terrified animal willing to do anything to survive. The trial was shorter than the walk to the podium. There were no juries, no witnesses, no tearful family members watching from the gallery. There was only the Inquisitor sitting high above me on a raised dais, bathed in a circle of white light, and the darkness where I stood. I was propped up by a metal frame because my legs could no longer support my weight. My head hung low, chin resting on my chest, drool mixing with the blood on my tunic. I looked like a puppet with cut strings. The air here was dry and still smelling of ozone and old dust. It felt like a tomb that hadn't been sealed yet. The Inquisitor held the scroll of my confession, the one I had screamed out under the needle. He didn't read it aloud. He simply weighed it in his hand, as if measuring the mass of my soul. "Valerius Krentz," he said. His voice echoed, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "Former governor. Former citizen. You have confessed to the crimes of sedition, embezzlement, spiritual negligence, and high treason against the holy throne of Terra." He paused, looking down at me with those dead gray eyes. "Do you recant?" I tried to lift my head. My neck muscles screamed in protest. "No," I rasped. My voice was a broken thing like grinding stones. "No recant. Guilty. I am guilty." I wanted to shout it. I wanted to make sure he heard me. If I was guilty, the punishment was death. That was the law. That was the mercy. I wanted the bolt shell. I wanted the darkness. I wanted the pain to stop. "Please," I whispered, "just finish it. The Emperor's justice. Swift. Please." The Inquisitor nodded slowly. He set the scroll aside and picked up a gavel made of black iron. It looked heavy. "You seek death," he observed, his tone conversational. "You seek the release of the grave. You believe that your suffering pays the debt you owe to the Imperium." He leaned forward, his face coming into the light. "But death is easy, Valerius. Death is a release. And the Imperium cannot afford to release its assets so easily." He struck the sounding block. Clang. The sound was not of wood on wood, but of metal on metal. It rang like a funeral bell. "The cost of your crimes exceeds the value of your life," he declared. "To execute you would be a waste of biological material. You have taken from the Emperor's tithe. Therefore, you shall become the tithe." He looked past me into the shadows behind my back. "Sentence class Omega Servitorization. You shall be stripped of higher brain function, repurposed for heavy labor, and serve the Golden Throne as a mindless automaton until your organic components fail." I froze. The words took a moment to sink in. Servitor. Not death. Not the void. Slavery. Eternal consciousless slavery. I would be a machine made of meat. I would be locked inside my own skull, screaming while my body scrubbed floors or hauled ammunition crates. "No," I whimpered. "No. Kill me. You have to kill me." I struggled against the metal frame, thrashing like a fish on a hook. "I am a noble. I have rights. I demand execution. Give me the bullet." The shadows behind me moved. Figures in red robes emerged, the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They smelled of oil and incense. Their mechadendrites writhed like metal snakes. They didn't speak. They simply grabbed me with pincers of cold steel. Subject secured, a synthesized voice buzzed. "Prepare for transport to the reclamation facility." I screamed. I screamed until my throat tore. "Mercy, Inquisitor." "Mercy." The Inquisitor didn't look up. He was already reaching for the next file on his desk. "This is mercy," he said, without looking at me. "Your soul is forfeit. We are simply saving your body for a useful purpose. Take it away." The tech priests dragged me backward into the dark. The last thing I saw was the Inquisitor dipping his quill into an inkwell, already forgetting I existed. The gavel had fallen. The man named Valerius was dead. The thing named Unit 734 was about to be born. The silence of the courtroom was replaced by the low rhythmic chanting of the machine cult. Deus est machina. Machina est Deus. It wasn't a prayer. It was an operating manual. They call it the apothecarian, but that is a lie. A hospital is where you go to be healed. This place was a factory. The air here was different from the dungeon or the courtroom. It was scrubbed clean, filtered until it had no smell at all, which only made the underlying stench of copper and heavy grease more nauseating. It was the smell of a butcher shop that had been sterilized with promethium. The walls were tiled in white, but the grout was stained a permanent rusty brown. They strapped me to a vertical slab, a crucifix of cold iron. I was spread-eagled, displayed like a specimen pinned to a board. The lighting was merciless banks of lumen strips that banished every shadow, leaving me nowhere to hide. A cherub, a vat-grown baby with cybernetic wings, fluttered down from the ceiling. It carried a tray of instruments. Its face was a mask of blissful ignorance, its eyes replaced with optical sensors. I stared at it, horrified. It was a mockery of life, just as I was about to become. A tech priest glided towards me. He did not walk. He hovered on a cushion of anti-grav, his red robes trailing on the floor. He was more machine than man. Half his face was a bronze mask, and his left arm was a nest of articulate drills and saws. He didn't speak to me. He spoke to the machine spirit of the table. Subject prep, he clicked. Initiate defoliation. The razor was cold. A servo arm extended from the wall, wielding a vibrating blade. It touched my scalp. Zzzt. A strip of hair fell to the floor. Zzzt. Another. I watched my hair pile up around my bare feet. It was thick, silver-streaked hair that I had groomed with scented oils every morning for 40 years. It was the hair of a governor. Now, it was just refuse. The razor moved to my chest, my arms, my legs. It shaved me raw, leaving me pink and shivering. I felt like a newborn or a plucked chicken. Without my hair, without my clothes, without my ring, I was just a generic human shape. I was blank canvas. Then came the ink. The tech priest extended a finger that ended in a felt-tipped marker. It smelled of strong chemicals. He began to draw on me. He drew a dotted line across my left shoulder. He drew a circle around my right eye. He drew a square over my heart. Amputation vector confirmed, he muttered in binary cant. Socket installation point verified. He was planning the demolition of my body while I was still inhabiting it. He was marking the parts of me that were inefficient and needed to be replaced with steel. I tried to pull away, but the restraints were solid adamant. Don't take my arm, I begged, my voice a pathetic whimper. I need it. I use it to write. I use it to hold things. The priest didn't pause. The Omnissiah provides better tools, he said. Flesh is weak. Steel is pure. I looked to my left. There was another slab. On it lay something. It had once been a woman. Now her legs were gone, replaced by tank treads. Her lower jaw was missing, replaced by a Vox grill. She wasn't moving. She was staring at the ceiling with eyes that had been glazed over by lobotomy. Was she alive? Did she know I looked away, bile rising in my throat? That was my future. A tracked unit, a heavy lifter, a gun mount. I looked down at my own body, the soft stomach of a man who loved rich food, the uncalloused hands of a man who never worked. I had spent a lifetime pampering this flesh. I had worshipped it. And now, the idol was about to be smashed. Anesthesia, the tech priest announced. I felt a surge of relief. Thank the throne. Sleep. Darkness. Let me sleep through the horror. A needle jabbed into my neck. Cold fluid rushed into my veins. But the darkness didn't come. My eyes didn't close. Instead, my body went rigid. I couldn't blink. I couldn't twitch a finger. I couldn't draw a breath. A machine began to pump air into my lungs for me. Paralytic agent active, the priest droned. Subject remains conscious to assist with neural integration. Pain receptors dampened, marginally. Conscious. The word echoed in my frozen skull. I was going to be awake. I was going to watch them take me apart. The priest raised his left arm. The circular saw spun up. Roar! The sound rose to a shriek, a high-pitched dental whine that vibrated in my teeth. He lowered the blade towards my left shoulder, right over the dotted black line. I tried to scream. My mind roared a soundless plea that would have shattered glass. But my mouth didn't move. My vocal cords were paralyzed. I could only stare wide-eyed and unblinking as the spinning teeth bit into my skin. A fine mist of red sprayed into the air. It wasn't mercy. It was an upgrade. The sound of the saw changed pitch. That is the detail that sticks in the mind, sharp as a splinter. It went from a high, hungry whine to a deep, grinding roar. It had found the bone. I felt the vibration travel up through my shoulder, rattling my teeth in my skull, shaking the jelly of my eyes. But I did not feel the pain. Not yet. The drugs had severed the connection between the nerve endings and the scream. I was a spectator in my own autopsy. I watched as the arm, my arm, the arm that had signed treaties and held lovers, fell away. It didn't drop with a thud. It swung loose, held by a final thread of sinew, before the tech priest severed it with a wet snip of his shears. It landed in a metal bin with a heavy, wet slap. I stared at it. The fingers were still twitching, grasping at air that was no longer there. It looked like a discarded glove. I felt a phantom itch in a palm that was currently lying in a waste bucket 3 feet away. Then came the fire. They didn't stitch the wound. They cauterized it. A branding iron, glowing white-hot, was pressed against the stump. The smell was instant and overwhelming, sweet pork and burning hair. It filled the room thick and greasy. If I could have vomited, I would have choked on it. But my throat was frozen. I could only inhale the smoke of my own cooked flesh. Then came the weight. A hydraulic crane lowered a limb of unpainted steel and pistons. It was crude industrial, covered in grease. It ended not in a hand, but in a heavy multi-purpose gripping claw. They jammed the metal socket onto the charred bone of my shoulder. I felt the intrusion. I felt the cold iron violate the sanctity of the body. Bolts were driven into my collarbone. Rat, tat, tat, tat. Impact drivers. They were bolting me together like a bulkhead door. The weight of the new limb dragged my torso down, tilting the world on its axis. I was lopsided. I was heavy. I was wrong. The worst was not the arm. The worst was the drill. The tech priest moved to my head. He adjusted the lenses of his mask, focusing on my temple. Cranial access, he buzzed. Lobotomization sequence alpha. He brought the drill bit to the side of my head. It was small, spinning so fast it looked like a blur of silver mist. When it touched the skin, the noise was not a sound I heard with my ears. It was a sound I heard with my skeleton. It was a shriek that existed inside the center of my brain. The bone gave way. The drill sank deep. And then the lights went out. But it wasn't darkness. It was a kaleidoscope of broken glass. My memories exploded. I saw my mother's face, but she was made of static. I tasted the amasec from the banquet, but it turned into the taste of battery acid. I felt the silk of my sheets, but it turned into sandpaper. The drill was churning through the gray matter, severing the connections that made me me. It was carving out the fear, the ambition, the pride. It was scooping out Valerius Krentz and leaving a hollow cavity. I tried to hold on. My name is Valerius, I thought. I am the governor. But the words were slippery. They dissolved into strings of numbers. Valerius, Val. Rowanodmosta1. Error. File corrupted. Something cold and hard was shoved into the hole in my skull. A cortex controller, a chip of silicon and gold inscribed with the holy prayers of the Mechanicus. It clicked into place, interfacing with the ruin of my brain. Suddenly, the chaos stopped. The memories didn't return, but the noise ceased. A new voice spoke. It wasn't the Inquisitor. It wasn't the priest. It was inside me. It was a flat, scrolling text that overlaid my vision, burning in neon green against the back of my eyelids. System boot. Diagnostics running. Spirit detected. Suppressing. I felt a wall slam down in my mind. A firewall. It pushed me the little spark of consciousness that remained into a tiny dark corner of the room. I was no longer the driver. I was a passenger locked in the trunk. The restraints released. Unit 734 online, the priest said. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the diagnostic slate in his hand. My body moved. I didn't tell it to move. It sat up. The hydraulics in my new arm whined. The heavy claw flexed, clack-clack, testing its servos. I tried to scream I am still here, but my mouth remained shut. The command had not been given to speak. I looked down at the metal claw. It was stained with oil. It was strong, it was ugly, and it was mine. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the code. And the code said obey. I stood up. The floor was cold, but I did not shiver. Machines do not shiver. There is no morning when you are a machine. There is only the transition from standby to active. I did not wake up in a bed with silk sheets. I woke up standing. My knees were locked in place by magnetic clamps. My head was heavy, weighed down by the augmetics bolted to my skull. I tried to blink to clear the grit from my eyes, but my eyelids did not respond. I realized then that I did not have eyelids. My organic eyes had been removed, replaced by optical sensors shielded behind thick red glass. The world did not look like the world anymore. It was a sea of crimson data. Text scrolled across my vision, a waterfall of neon green runes that obscured the reality in front of me. Optical unit 734. Online. Hydraulics 98%. Nutrient levels optimal. Awaiting input. I read the words, but I didn't understand them. Who was Unit 734? I was Valerius. I tried to say it. I tried to scream my name into the silence. I am Valerius. The impulse traveled from my brain down the neural pathways and hit a wall. It was a physical sensation, like running full tilt into a glass door. The chip in my head intercepted the thought. Unauthorized vocalization detected. Suppressing. My jaw remained clamped shut. My vocal synthesis unit remained silent. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I was a statue of meat and iron, perfectly still. I looked around. I was in a hangar. It was vast, smelling of recycled air and ozone. I was not alone. To my left and right, stretching into the distance, were rows of them. Us, servitors. Thousands of us standing in perfect silent ranks. Some were heavy lifters with forklifts for arms. Some were scribes with data spikes for fingers. Some were just torsos, mounted on tank treads. We were the inventory. I looked at the creature next to me. It had the face of a man I might have once passed in the street. His mouth was sewn shut with copper wire. His chest was a cavity of open gears. He was staring straight ahead, vacant, empty. Was he in there? Was he screaming too? Or was I the only one who hadn't been fully scrubbed? A klaxon sounded. It was a harsh, rhythmic blare that triggered an automatic response in my programming. Shift cycle start. The words flashed in the center of my vision, pulsing with urgency. Destination loading dock 4. Priority. High. I didn't want to go to loading dock 4. I wanted to go home. I wanted to curl up in a ball and weep, but my body betrayed me. My new leg, the one made of piston and steel, stepped forward. Clang. My organic leg followed. Step. I tried to stop. I concentrated every ounce of my will on freezing my knee. Stop, I begged. Just stop. My leg didn't even hesitate. It marched with a mechanical perfection that mocked my struggle. I was a passenger in a vehicle that had no steering wheel. We marched in unison. The sound was deafening, the rhythmic thud-clank of thousands of metal feet hitting the deck plating. We moved like a river of iron. We passed a reflective surface, a polished steel bulkhead. I saw myself for the first time. I didn't recognize the monster in the reflection. A bald, scarred head with wires trailing from the skull like dreadlocks. A massive claw where a hand should be. a chest plate stamped with the Imperial Aquila, and a serial number, 50 Omega. I stared at the number. That was me. Valerius was gone. He was just a ghost haunting the machine. The march continued. My mind raced, panic fluttering like a trapped bird. This is a nightmare, I thought. I will wake up. The amasec was bad. This is a fever dream. But the smell of the oil was too real. The cold ache where my arm used to be was too sharp. The scrolling data feed was too precise. Distance to target 200 meters. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake, and I was never going to sleep again. The realization settled over me colder than the void. I was trapped. I would walk when they told me to walk. I would lift when they told me to lift. And I would do it forever, watching through this red glass window, screaming a scream that no one would ever hear. The line of servitors turned a corner. I turned with them. I had no choice. Obey, the code whispered. And I obeyed. The algorithm routed me to the upper levels. Destination Spire Apex. Function support. I rode the freight elevator squeezed between a pallet of hydroponic melons and a crate of explosive bolter shells. The elevator smelled of grease and stale ozone, but as the doors hissed open, a new scent hit my sensors. It was a smell I knew better than my own name. It was the scent of roasted swan expensive perfumes and the sharp alcohol tang of amasec. My internal chronometer indicated it was evening. The logic engine identified the location sector Alpha 1, the grand banquet hall. My home, my hall, the place where I had stood on the dais and toasted the stars. I stepped out onto the marble floor. My heavy metal feet clanked against the polished stone, thud, 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 but the sound was drowned out by the music. It was the same synthesized quartet, playing the same inoffensive waltz. The room was filled with the same people. I saw Lady Vernia draped in the pelts of endangered snow foxes, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. I saw General Harkin, his chest puffed out with medals he hadn't won. They looked exactly as they had on the night of the Black Ship. But they didn't look at me. To them, I was not Valerius Krentz, returning from the dead. I was furniture. I was a mobile table. I was a thing that existed solely to be ignored. My HUD flashed a green command arrow. Objective clear debris, Sector 4. I marched towards the main table. A glass had been dropped. Crystal shards glittered on the floor like diamonds. A puddle of red wine was spreading across the white marble. I reached the mess. My programming took over. My right arm, the one that was still flesh, though pale and scarred, held a dustpan. My left arm, the hydraulic claw, held a stiff brush. I knelt. The servo motors in my knees whined loud enough to be heard, but the guests simply stepped around me, their conversation flowing over my head like water over a rock. I began to sweep. The motion was jerky mechanical. Sweep, deposit, sweep, deposit. Inside I was screaming. Look at me. It's me. I signed your trade permits. I approved your marriages. Look at me. But the scream died in the vacuum of my throat. A pair of boots stopped in front of my face. They were polished black leather trimmed with gold. I knew those boots. I had commissioned them from a cobbler on Terra. I looked up. The sensors in my eyes adjusted the focus, zooming in on the figure sitting on the throne, my throne. It was my cousin Commodus. He was wearing my sash. He was drinking from my goblet. He looked bored. He looked powerful. He looked exactly like I used to look. He glanced down at me at the hulking cyborg cleaning up his spilled wine. There was no recognition in his eyes, only a mild aristocrat's disgust. "This unit is leaking oil," Commodus said, gesturing vaguely with his hand. "It smells. It's ruining the bouquet of the vintage." He waved his hand, the hand holding the goblet. And there it was, on his ring finger, the Krentz signet, the heavy gold band with the ruby drop. It caught the light of the chandeliers flashing a deep bloody red. My logic engine spiked. Heart rate, critical. Cortex stress detected, initiating calming protocol. I felt a chemical damper flood my brain, forcing the rage down, smothering the fire with a blanket of artificial apathy. I wanted to reach out with my claw and crush his throat. I wanted to take back my ring, but my hand continued to sweep the glass. Sweep. Deposit. Remove it, Commodus ordered, turning back to Lady Vernia. Get a newer model, one that doesn't wheeze. A steward, a man I had hired myself 10 years ago, hurried over. He kicked my leg. Move! 734, he hissed. You heard the governor. Back to the cargo lifts. He kicked me again. It didn't hurt. I was made of iron now. But the indignity burned hotter than the branding iron. I stood up. The servos groaned. I held the dustpan full of broken crystal and wine-soaked dust. It was all I had left of my former life. A pile of trash. I turned and marched away. As I passed the table, the smell of the amasec rose up from the spill on the floor. It was rich, spicy, intoxicating. For a microsecond, I remembered the taste of it on my tongue, the warmth spreading through my chest. Then the memory was deleted to free up processing power for navigation. Route plotted maintenance shaft. I walked out of the hall past the laughing nobles, past the music, past the life I had lost. The doors closed behind me, cutting off the light. I was back in the dark, and in the silence of the service corridor, I understood the true horror of my sentence. I was not being punished with death. I was being punished with irrelevance. I was a ghost who had to clean up the mess of the living. Rust is the only calendar I have left. I do not know how many years have passed since the banquet. The data logs in my cortex are corrupted, overwritten 1,000 times by shipping manifests and cleaning schedules. I am no longer the shiny, terrifying sentinel of the spire. My plating is pitted and scarred. My hydraulic fluid leaks, leaving a trail of black grease wherever I walk. I have been demoted. I was moved from the palace to the lower hives, and then to the reclamation yards. Now I haul scrap. I pick up the broken bodies of other machines and throw them into the furnace. It is fitting work. The dead burying the dead. The man inside is almost gone. Valerius is a ghost signal, a glitch that flickers in the background when my processor overheats. I try to remember his face, but the file is damaged. I see a blur of white skin and a purple sash, but it means nothing to me. It evokes no pride, no shame. It is just an image, like a picture of a stranger found in the mud. I try to remember the taste of amasec. Error. File not found. I try to remember the sound of my mother's voice. Error. Data unrecoverable. The erosion is absolute. The machine has won. It has ground the soul down to dust, leaving only the function. I am carrying a heavy load, a rusted axle from a chimera transport, when the warning flashes. Organic component failure. Multiple organ collapse. It does not hurt. My nervous system burned out years ago. There is just a sudden loss of pressure. My knees buckle. The servos whine in protest, trying to compensate for the dead weight of my flesh, but it is too much. I fall. The axle clatters to the deck. I hit the ground, hard face down in the oil and grime. I cannot get up. The command prompt screams, "Stand," "Resume," "Stand." But the signal does not reach the legs. The meat has finally quit the job. A tech adept stands over me. He is young, his robes bright red, not yet stained by centuries of grease. He scans my barcode with a handheld reader. Unit 734, he mutters. Biomass expired. Logic engine obsolete. Hydraulics compromised. He doesn't call for a medic. He doesn't call for a repair crew. He kicks my chassis, testing the solidity of the metal. Not worth the parts, he decides. Scrap it. Incinerator 4. I am lifted by a claw. It is a larger version of my own arm. I dangle in the air, limp and broken. The claw swings me over the pit. Below, the magma coils of the plasma furnace glow with a blinding white heat. It is the brightest light I have seen since the interrogation room. It is beautiful. Temperature 4,000 degrees, my HUD tells me. Lethal. The claw opens. I fall. The heat hits me before I touch the coils. It is a wave of pure cleansing fire. It burns away the oil. It burns away the rust. It burns away the code. For a millisecond, as the sensors melt and the cortex chip fuses, the firewall drops. The suppression protocol fails. And in that final fraction of a second, I remember. I remember the cold wine. I remember the soft music. I remember my name. I am Valerius. And then there is nothing. The silence is perfect. The war is over. If you were given the choice between the bolt pistol instant death or servitorization eternal service, which would you choose? Most people say death, but would you have the courage to ask for it? Tell me in the comments. Next episode, The Life of a Hive City Ganger. Subscribe so you don't miss it.